2 years of the Modi government, it's perhaps the best time to take stock of work that has been done and the ground that still needs to be covered. And who better than one of the main architects of policy making here in New Delhi, Mr. Arun Jaitley, India's Finance Minister, joining us live right here on ET Now. Thank you very much for sparing time out, sir. Congratulations on your second anniversary. And if exit poll results are to go by, you will have a lot to celebrate by the end of it. But I must first ask you and urge you to wear your Finance Minister's cap, because we are live and Indian market participants and investors are listening to this interview. They want to know a lot of the ground that has been covered and stuff that still needs to be done. Like I said, 2 years is a good time to take cognizance of what has been done. Your worst critics will tell you you've made a very honest attempt at declogging the system. You've made a very honest attempt at reviving the investment cycle. You've done a lot of work which was an unfinished work of sorts by the previous government, not done. But I'm sure you had your own laundry list of things that you would have wanted to do as Finance Minister. How much of that has been ticked in the boxes and stuff that still remains to be done?
I've always believed that as far as economic decision making, particularly economic reforms are concerned, there is never a finishing line.
That's right.
As you move forward, newer and newer challenges will develop. And literally by the year, or even shorter periods, you will have to innovate new suggestions. Who would have suggested 2 years ago that the world needs higher commodity prices or higher oil prices for the world to grow? Now, these are fast evolving situations. And therefore, to deal with these situations, you will have to find innovative solutions. So I can never say that the job of any finance minister will be over. But I can tell you what we've done in the last 2 years is structural, it's directional, and if the history of Indian reforms from 1991 is written, this certainly will go down as one of the very critical phases.
I completely concede the fact that you have tried to make transformational changes to Indian economy, but you are someone who believes that India's potential to grow is in double digits, 8, 9, 10%.
You see,
have you made your peace with the fact that 7 to 8% is a realistic growth target right now?
You see, when the going is good, we are all at our best. And therefore, you can reach 8 and 9.5% growth rates. It's when the growing is very challenging, extremely difficult. Oil prices are low, commodity prices are low, global growth is not there, global demand is not there, trade is shrinking. In a hostile environment, to grow between 7 to 8% is a good growth rate. But if the global tailwinds become supportive, India has the potential to grow at least by 1% or 2%, certainly over and above our present growth rates.
Because you mentioned one such tailwind, and in your own admission previously in our interviews and just till yesterday, you said that benign crude oil prices have really been of advantage to you, your policy making and your government. We are seeing oil steadily reach the $50 a barrel mark. Do you fear we are perhaps going to be once more vulnerable to inflation, CAD? Is that tailwind beginning to wane?
You see, as far as the oil prices are concerned, this is one area where nobody has been able to predict, even reasonably, what's going to happen. It's only after the event that people analyze what has happened. When the prices were close to $120, nobody really thought that they'll come down below 30.
True.
At 30, they said it could stabilize at 40. Now it's 50. I think they're still range bound. And being range bound, they are within the limits of what India can consider to be affordable. And therefore, unless there is some very alarming increase, which doesn't look likely at the moment, I think we are reasonably comfortable.
Is there a range in your mind at which you'll be comfortable with oil?
Well, I don't want to give a figure, but current pricing, plus minus, is a range bound, which gives me some level of comfort.
I must though go back to the growth figures that we were talking about. I know the one-eyed remark of Governor Rajan did upset a lot of people in your government. You have of course been very measured in your reactions to that statement, but don't you believe that's an honest assessment? Because at 7 to 8% we can't be the shining spot.
You see, in today's context at 7 to 8%, we are the shining spot.
Okay.
Compared to the rest of the world, we are doing exceedingly well. But if we measure ourselves by our own standards and our own potential, I don't think we should really be rejoicing. Our potential is much more. And if I can elaborate this a little further, what is contributing to our growth today?
Right.
Predominantly public investment, foreign direct investment, some good activity in the private sector, in some of the sectors, urban demand. In days to come, I see if there is a good monsoon, rural demand will push up. That will also push up some growth. But then there are many adverse factors, external and internal, which are operating. Externally, the global environment is very slow. That impacts on trade. That impacts on volatility. Domestically, the private sector is still to come back to its original spirits. The ability of the banks to lend hugely for growth is still lacking. 2 bad monsoons. Demand still has to pick up. Now, we are fighting in this environment. And therefore, 7 to 8% growth rate compared to the rest of the world is a good growth rate.
And we should not be beating ourselves down with 7 to 8%.
We should not be beating ourselves down. We should, even in this adversity, understand as to how we can build firewalls around ourselves. Look at some green shoots which may emerge out of the given situation, and then how do we add to this growth rate? For instance, at the moment, the one positive focus appears to be a possible good monsoon.
Is the delayed monsoon a bit of a concern for you? Did we celebrate too early?
I don't think we are celebrating. There is a cautious optimism as far as the monsoon is concerned. You see, after 2 years, if you have a good monsoon, it's not only the agriculture that moves up and the agrarian distress settles down a little. I think it also gives rise to demand. And then the spiral effect of that is some private sector picks up, banking activity picks up and so on.
Right.
Construction can pick up, tractors will pick up, two-wheeler scooters will pick up. Now, all the rural-related growth indexes then come into operation.
True. Yes. I must ask you some big picture questions before I go down to specifics like banks and infrastructure. In the last 2 years, and I know you are one of the proponents of this thinking that there should be minimum government and maximum governance, but a lot of people out there believe that you haven't lived up to that slogan. There's still a lot of government that's present, whether it is in areas where the government should not be present. I know there is early thinking about moving out of those areas, but how will you defend the position that you haven't really walked the talk as far as minimum government, maximum governance is concerned?
I think we have walked the talk. The best evidence of it is how many business people visit this office in North Block every day now.
That's because you don't entertain them anymore.
No, I entertain each one of them. I even serve them coffee. You see, they apply and their applications are granted in usual course. Whether it's environment or it's FIPB or it's some other policy matters, we've been quick to decide this. Second, so this policy decisions are taken faster. 2, permissions are a matter of routine rather than pushing files. Lobbying for policy hardly takes place. The third important factor which has also taken place is that there are no discretions left with the government.
That's right, yes.
So you don't have to come to me
for...
And that's
a big green on your report card.
You don't have to come to us for coal mines or iron ore mine. You have to go out and then you bid. So what all happened in Spectrum and coal, etc., all that is over. So all business people will now sit on their laptop and then bid, pay the exchequer its money. They don't have to come and lobby with ministers. Now, all this has taken place, but there is an area. You see, I was analyzing the World Bank criteria on the ease of doing business.
That's right.
And this question is directly related to that.
True.
Now, wherever central government is concerned, we've eased it. We widened policy.
But the last mile is actually with the states.
And now, after the bankruptcy law, I think our rankings will move up significantly. But then it will stop at that. Because you've increased FDI sectoral limits, you are granting quick permissions, you give an environmental clearance, you give an FIBB clearance, you give all interministerial clearances.
But won't it all boil down to the last mile?
When he goes and sets up his factory to buy land and give a municipal plan,
that's where the state government comes in.
I'm told that in real estate permissions, development, in the World Bank rankings out of 189 days, we are in the last 10.
That's true.
So unless you allow that, so these are reforms which have to translate there. And therefore, those reforming and performing states, which actually want the investment to come into their states, will have to ease in those proposals. I am now looking at each one of those criteria in the next round of reforms, so that we can advise the states as to what changes they are supposed to make.
I have a question on that, and I'll come to that in just a bit. But the reason why I asked you the minimum government, maximum governance question was that there are issues that are that could have well been ticked off your laundry list. You know, a UTI listing, for example. The last time we spoke, you said privatization is no longer a taboo word. The markets want to know, why aren't you moving on this? I mean, these are sitting duck reforms that NDA one took. You have the political appetite to take it.
In the course of a television comment or a column, it's very easy to say. But have you seen in the last 1 year the volatility of the Indian market?
Yeah, that's true.
Now those public sector undertakings, which we had scheduled for divestment and could have considered some for privatization,
true.
If the metal stocks, if the oil stocks, the gas stocks
are
record low, now why do you expect me to sell at that time? The government's funds today are in a reasonable situation. They are not in a desperate situation that I must sell when the markets are low. Therefore, as somebody who feels that the touchstone criteria of every decision has to be public interest, it's only when the markets move up that you can boldly do some more disinvestment or privatization.
Fair point.
And therefore, we will have to see the health of the market in order to decide which stock to divest at which stage. We found an alternate mechanism of buyback in a low market situation.
Will we see a lot of that happen this year?
You see, I think we've now given various options. You have divestment as an option. You have strategic sales as an option.
Asset recycling.
You have an asset recycling as an option. You have a buyback as an option. So I think all the options are open.
I will go back to the point that you just made about the last mile being with the states, and states will have to become performing and reforming states. Do you believe in the first 2 years you wasted political capital on two things, land and labor predominantly? Because this is eventually going to be a decision with the states.
You see, I'll tell you, as far as labor is concerned, I think by and large the Indian trade union movement is a responsible movement. The era of long strikes and big protests is over. You don't have mandates lost. After all, trade unions also realize that job creation is the best labor-friendly measure which is possible. And therefore, to get into this repeated argument, we discuss with the trade unions. If some easing of the processes is required as far as labor laws are concerned, we've done some, we can do some. But I don't think, and the private sector privately comes in, confers with me and tells me that it's not a serious problem in India. India's challenge on the labor front is job creation.
That's right. And you have said that even those people need to realize job preservation is one part and creation is the other.
Job preservation and job creation, I think these are extremely important.
Yes.
Now, on land, you may have a valid point. We were deliberately misled by the Congress party. All chief ministers, including those of the Congress party, told us, please amend this law. We brought something which was retrograde.
That's right.
We trusted them. When we brought the amendments, they turned around and said, no, we can't support it. So the rest of the chief ministers told us, leave it to us. There are states which have surplus land. They say we don't need land. There are states which say we'll make local amendments. Will the centre permit them? We said we'll permit them. So land is not going to be a problem. So it's now, as you rightly said, it's decentralized with the states. We tried an honest method and we have to be flexible. We tried to amend it ourselves. We've left it to the states. Let them do it if they want.
One of the other big decisions that people expect you to take, and again, this is something that you've announced in the budget, so it's only fair we talk about this, the FRBM committee or the NIIF. Many people believe these are decisions you've announced in the budget. What is taking so much time for these decisions to be made? The two specifically that I mentioned.
Why don't you wait for a couple of hours?
A couple of hours. Oh my God, I could have got my headline in this interview, but because you refused me to. I must now turn focus, sir, and this is a little controversial, and I know you have a certain view on this, but I still must ask you this question. The other big appointment announcement that people are keeping a very close eye on, keeping their ears very close to the ground, is the RBI governor. I know you've said it in the past, and I appreciate it. The fact is that the decision will be taken at the highest level between you and the Prime Minister. But just before I walked into this interview, Subramanian Swamy has written a direct letter to the Prime Minister saying that the term of the RBI governor should be terminated with immediate effect. Is that a view of the party? Because I know it's not the view of the government.
I have repeatedly said this. As far as issues relating to individuals are concerned, particularly those in very eminent positions, it's not fair, at least for me, somebody else may want to do it, to comment on individuals in the public space. I think what's important are issues and not personalities. Secondly, whether what happens to the RBI governor's second term or no second term, what his own views on the subject are these matters to be discussed publicly? I can tell you, the RBI and the Finance Ministry, I have always used this word consciously, have a very mature level of consultation and a relationship. The governor and I discuss all issues. And it's not fair for any one of us to be commenting on those issues which we discuss in the public space. Now, the government is a responsible institution. The RBI is a very responsible institution. We'll take our decisions without being influenced by any other factor.
But because you manage that institutional relationship, and most people say it's being managed very well now, there were issues in the past, in the previous regime, but it's being managed very well between the two of you. Things like he's wrecking the Indian economy, he's acting as a disruptor. Do you reckon with these views that are being made publicly? Well, and does that put you in a spot of sorts? Is that embarrassing for you as Finance Minister?
It doesn't put me in a spot. Everybody has his own style of doing politics. And therefore, as far as the government is concerned and I am concerned, we have a particular way of dealing with institutions. I am a respecter of institutions. And therefore, I will maintain that level of maturity which the relationship which has evolved, which has existed even during earlier governments between the RBI and the Finance Ministry. And I think it's important to preserve these relationships. Now that in future there will be a monetary policy committee, and these are very sensitive decisions in the life of a country that these committees are going to be taken. And therefore, I think devoid of personalities, on basis of the issues, it's extremely important that this relationship matures further and grows.
Sir, the reason why I'm asking you this question is, and pardon me for, taking one more question on this subject, is because in the past you have said, and in a very different context, that, the communal rant that one was seeing was unwarranted. You said those kind of voices should be reined in. This is a rant of a different kind, the kind of rant that Mr. Swamy is creating. You certainly don't support it, do you?
It's not necessary for me to comment on everything. And therefore, I have the option of commenting on what I am doing and what my own opinion is.
So will you then at least tell me by when will you take the decision of whether there will be a second term or not? And has he fared well to deserve a second term?
Well, whenever we take a decision, you will get to know that.
I must move to banking, sir, and I think one of the biggest thumbs up that you get is at least you've taken cognizance of the problem. You've admitted that there is an issue, and now you're going to get a handle on this. The question that I'm asking is that somewhere along the line, some people believe that not at the Finance Ministry level, but at an institutional level, we are perhaps chasing promoters, we are perhaps chasing borrowers and losing sight of recovering money that was lent. Is that a view that kind of disturbs you?
You see, I think I said in another context, we have all to act with responsibility and restraint. Now, in the matter of a debtor-creditor relationship, if the parliament gets into it, if the courts get into it, if the media gets into it, the entire pressure then comes on the banking executives.
That's right.
With the pressure of the court, with the pressure of parliament, with the pressure of media, their motives and intentions being suspected, I think we are disabling the executives from coming to the best possible settlement on banking considerations. Now that the song and dance of all these important cases has been sung, I think it's better to trust our bankers as an institution. The sector improves, the business cycle improves, the debtor starts paying the money back. You see, the fact that people owe money to the banks is not a bad thing. That's how economic activity goes on, because banks support economic.
Yes.
It's only when it becomes a non-performing asset that it becomes a difficult situation. I think any debtor, by abandoning the companies and abandoning the debt and escaping from the territorial jurisdiction, does a lot of harm to every other debtor.
That's right. Yes.
He does harm to the whole institution because people now start distrusting every debtor. I think we have to come back to normal. We have to empower our banks to sort out matters. They must be legally empowered. So the entire new legislative regime we are bringing in will legally empower them. And I think they must try and work for the best possible settlement. At the end of the day, this is business, this is commerce.
That's a very mature assessment of the situation, but you've prompted me to my next question. One of the reasons why there is negotiation that is still on and hasn't really resulted in a lot of headway perhaps is that bankers are very wary of taking controversial decisions. They could be pulled up years later. There is this environment of mistrust, like you said, driven by institutions, and I blame media for a certain part of it. Don't you believe an expert group or an independent group is going to come to their aid? Is that something that's on your radar at all?
You see, there are various suggestions under consideration, and this is one of the suggestions. This is one of the suggestions. Except that we should create mechanisms which distrust everybody.
That's true.
And therefore, you see, in banking settlements or in debtor-creditor settlements, creditors take a haircut.
That's true.
They cut their losses in order to see that the activity goes on. The world has to move on, banks have to move on.
But that's exactly what is not happening perhaps right now.
And therefore, we have to now re-strengthen our banks and prepare them for this situation. Now, if for some mechanism in between to further empower the bankers is required, we are considering various suggestions and we'll take an appropriate decision.
You know, you made a very valid point that by running away from the jurisdiction of the land, a debtor who's done that has actually done a lot of discredit. I will name him and you haven't. Vijay Mallya has still not responded to a lot of queries that have been sent. He's apparently written to both you and the SBI chief. The question though is that is he going to be used as an example for the rest of them to line up, begin paying up? Because that is the larger context,
I'll tell you, I think, I hate to speak on individuals.
Right.
But since you asked the question.
But this is a case that is
But in
public.
any case, if a debtor runs away from the territorial jurisdiction of India, it's not merely the banks, it's the people as a whole who feel cheated.
That's true.
That here is somebody who's taken the money and just disappeared, and is this country
And that
helpless?
is why there is such public outrage.
So the public outrage is because the country feels, are we helpless? And therefore, the United Kingdom says we won't deport him, go through the extradition mechanism, etc. And I think that has created this outrage. Now, this outrage apart, I still feel that banks should be strengthened, and I will fully support the banks and stand behind them in as much as on commercial considerations, they come to take commercial decisions, oblivious of what's the kind of pressures being put onto them.
Right.
The government would support them, and if any other supporting mechanism is required to empower them for this purpose, I would be open to considering this.
There is something else that you have said, and it is something that bothers a lot of people out there. They may not have platforms to voice that consideration. In the previous regime, when judicial activism was happening, it was being blamed on policy paralysis. There was a policy vacuum of sorts. I mean, one will concede there is none right now. What do you then blame this judicial activism on? To be told how do you manage NPAs, to be told what do you do about drought management?
I'll tell you.
Is the executive and judiciary on collision course of sorts?
I don't think it should ever be on a collision course, or for that matter, it's on a collision course.
But there is an activism and an outreach.
You see, I see nothing wrong in activism also. There are areas of activism where activism has helped. In environmental protection, it has helped.
But hasn't that undermined the authority of...
My issue is slightly different.
Right.
I think independence of judiciary is very vital. So you need an independent, vibrant, empowered judiciary.
Right.
Nothing that I say or anybody else says should be taken to weaken the judiciary as an institution. Judiciary has a domain which is judicial review of all executive decisions.
That's right.
They can even review a legislation. So to that extent, in India,
On
judiciary can exercise judicial review of executive action and legislation. If it's illegal or unconstitutional, they can strike it down. That's within their legitimate cause. The difficult challenge arises when in the garb of judicial review, there is the exercise of executive power which starts. Now, executive power under separation of powers is to be exercised only by the executive.
Yes.
Whether the executive is good or bad, it's their job. Judiciary can direct the executive to do its job. It can review the acts of the executive.
But it can't do the executive's actions.
But it can't take away the executive function. And I gave yesterday, in an interaction, a good reasoning for this. As the executive, when I take a decision, my decision can be criticized every evening by you on television. The newspapers can write an editorial against it. People can come outside this office and hold demonstrations against my decision.
Yes.
My decision can be challenged in court. On basis of this decision, we can be voted out.
So there are multiple levels of checks and balances.
The checks and balances against executive decisions are there. But if the judiciary says, well, I will take the executive decision in the name of judicial review, is any of these accountability mechanisms available? The answer clearly is no.
And that should bother a lot of...
And therefore, therefore, just as independence of judiciary is extremely important, separation of powers is also equally important.
And preservation of that separation of powers.
And preservation of that separation of powers is also important.
I must turn focus to something that should bring a smile on your face. The exit polls seem to say that you're going to be forming the next government by all accounts in Assam. It has been a very, very strong Congress stronghold. Does this mark a tectonic shift for the BJP? You've always been considered as a party in north of India, and here you're making a stronghold in a state like Assam.
I'll tell you, if you see the growth of the BJP from north of India, we then first spread to the west. And our areas of influence became Gujarat and Maharashtra after Madhya Pradesh and Rajasthan. Then from Uttar Pradesh, we moved to Bihar. Then in South, we made our maiden entry. I was in charge at that time in 2008 when we captured Karnataka on our own strength. And this time, if it's Assam, I think it's going to be a very significant part. But I think equally important is the percentage of vote that we get, particularly in Kerala, and maybe in Bengal, I think will be significant. I expect BJP to poll its highest ever vote in Kerala. And therefore, from Karnataka, our next destination will be Kerala, and eastward, our next destination will be Assam.
I must though ask you a question. The way the Assam election was contested was very unlike Delhi or Bihar. You did not use the Prime Minister or your central leadership as the face of that campaign. You chose a local leader. Sonowal led that campaign. He was the face of the party. Is that a template one presumes will be used by the BJP because it has worked well for you?
I'll tell you, every election has its own story. if you ask me what influenced the election in Delhi the most, I think it was the eclipse of the Congress. If instead of 8% vote, Congress had got its 20-23% vote,
it would have been a different election.
It would have been a different election.
Yes.
What was the key factor in Bihar? And I think the key factor in Bihar was that 3 major political parties combined against us.
Yeah, the index of political
so the
opportunities, what you
width
said.
of the alliance against us was very large. I think what our opponents did in Bihar is exactly what we did in Assam. And therefore, the fact that the BJP, AGP and the Bodo People's Front came together, the width of that alliance was very wide.
But do you believe the exit polls, what they indicate in Bengal or in Tamil Nadu, does this make case for an anti-BJP alliance? And increasingly, we will perhaps see Congress being relegated to the margins. They are perhaps not going to be a catalyst of this alliance that
you see, the anti-BJP alliance obviously will be there. But the nucleus of the alliance has to be very strong. The anchor of the alliance has to be very powerful. You can't have an insignificant anchor. If you have a very insignificant anchor of the alliance, then what happened to the united front between 96 and 98? That the principal party in the alliance is 20 seats.
Is a non-player.
Is hardly a player. And therefore, unless the anchor of the alliance itself has 150 or 200 seats, a national alliance doesn't work.
Find us on Facebook at facebook.com/ETNow and don't forget to click the like button. You can also follow us on Twitter at ETNowLive. To stay updated with all our programming, hit the subscribe button on our YouTube channel by logging on to youtube.com/user/ETNow.